Wallbuilders, Lessons from Nehemiah on Building Our Spiritual Walls. My name is Patty Shader, and I'm bringing you this Bible study right here from my home in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. In this study, we'll be taking a look at the book of Nehemiah, but mostly focusing on the section of Nehemiah where he is working on building the city walls again in Jerusalem. So come on with me, because we're going to study how the rebuilding of those walls in Jerusalem relate to our spiritual lives today. Now, while I have been studying this topic, there have been some interesting things going on here around our farm. Let me explain it to you a little bit. We have an acreage here of 158 acres. It's in the shape of a rectangle. And all the way around the rectangle, we have an electric fence because we have cows and sheep on our property and we want to keep them onto the property. One day, my husband and I were walking in the back third of the property, which is wooded. The front 2/3 are the grazing land. And we were just having a nice walk in the back, and we happened upon a man and his wife and their dog. We were very surprised to find them on our property, and they didn't look nervous or anything. So we took a look at him and noticed he was packing a gun on the side on his hip, and he was also carrying a rifle. And we weren't too sure about how friendly the dog was going to be either. So we approached them cautiously and we asked them what they were doing, and they said they were looking for mushrooms. And we explained that we were the property owners here, and we'd really like to know when people are coming onto our property, but we would give them permission to look for mushrooms. They just needed to call us and let us know what was going on. So they said fine, and we headed back up toward the house. And the more we thought about it over the next days, we realized maybe we need to know what's really going on our property. So my husband John set up some game cameras. When we took a look at those game cameras, we discovered there was a lot more going on the back of our property than we ever dreamed. I'll be telling you more about this story as we go later into the Bible study. I also want to tell you that we have a gate at the front of our property that leads into the driveway to come up to the house. And it's one of those farm gates that has the punch-in code, and then it will open the gate to let people in. I also believe that this is part of our security because we have wonderful neighbors here, but we also have some interesting characters that live around here. We want to be sure that we keep the good people coming in, but people that maybe are not so desirable out. So that's a picture of what's been going on here. This is all relating to what's going on in the book of Nehemiah, as you will find out. Now, we have physical walls, of course, but we also have spiritual walls, and that's what we're going to be talking about building. In my very first testimony I gave, called Pulling into the Stronghold, I explained the word metzad, which means strong fortress. When we accept Jesus Christ as Savior, He puts a strong wall around us. And anytime we like, we can pull in to that strong fortress, get closer to Him, and feel more secure. Then I taught a lesson about Hezekiah, and we talked about when he was going to become under attack by the Assyrians, he fortified the city of Jerusalem and built up a wall called the Broad Wall. We saw it when we were in Jerusalem. You can see it too if you go there today. The next study I tackled was Ezra, and they were returning from the Babylonian captivity to rebuild the temple. They were returning to the stronghold because in those days, Jerusalem itself, that walled city, was called a stronghold. There were many other fortified cities in the land, but at that time, Jerusalem was known as the stronghold. Now, about 100 years after they returned to rebuild the temple, Nehemiah is coming on the scene, and he is going to enter the scene to rebuild the walls in Jerusalem again because they were still laying in ruins. So in this study, what we're going to talk about, three major things. First of all, what is a wall builder and what are some of the characteristics of wall builders and some of the pitfalls that wall builders run into? And then next, how to build and fortify your wall, and then finally, how to identify some holes that may be in your wall. I had a friend named Jackie. In fact, she's still my friend, and she came over years ago. I bet it was about 15 years ago. And she sat in my kitchen, and I was telling her about my problems and some things that had happened with some other friends. And I was overwhelmed and feeling under attack. And she looked at me and she said, "Patty, you have got to find the holes in your breastplate of righteousness, and you've got to close those up." I looked at her and I said, "What? This is a totally new concept to me. You mean I might be doing something that's allowing the enemy to come in and attack me? There may be holes in my breastplate of righteousness?" She said, "Yes." This was an interesting start of a journey of me starting to examine where I might be letting the enemy attack, where the holes were in my spiritual walls. Now, we do know that when Jesus saved us, he put this spiritual wall around us. Nothing can separate us from him. But there occasionally are holes in our wall that get through because of sins, because of things that we allow to happen. Also, we're going to take a look at spiritual gates. Right now, that gate that I was telling you about earlier is broken, and it's been broken for about 3 months. And it just doesn't matter what my husband does to try to fix it, or how many times the company comes out to try to fix it, they can't get it fixed. This has become a constant irritation to my husband. A broken gate can be your source of constant irritation. So I challenge you, maybe your source of things going on, this constant thing that's happening in your home, maybe you've allowed your spiritual gate to stay open and you're letting some things in. If we're going to study Nehemiah, we have to jump into a little bit to understanding who Nehemiah was and some facts that lead up to the book of Nehemiah. So I'm going to briefly do that for you. Now remember, Judah was carted off to Babylon, and they were in captivity there to the Babylonians for 70 years. The remnant of the Jews were there in Babylon, and Jerusalem had been completely destroyed. The temple was destroyed, the homes were destroyed, the walls were destroyed. Then in 538 BC, Cyrus of the Persians takes over the Babylonian Empire overnight. Daniel is brought out of retirement and presents him with a scroll of Isaiah, naming him by name and saying that he will allow the Jews to return back to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. So he did, and he declares an edict that allows them to go. So they do return and they rebuild the temple. It takes them about 20 years. Then time goes on, and Esther becomes queen of Persia in 478. In 457 BC, Ezra comes on the scene, and he leads a second deportation of people back to Jerusalem to encourage them spiritually. And then 12 years later, Nehemiah, who is under the same king as Ezra, Artaxerxes, also gets permission to go back, but this time to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now, as we open the book of Nehemiah and read chapter 1, we see that Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king of Persia. That means he would be very close. He was the one tasting his food and pouring his wine and tasting his wine. He was always in the presence of the king, and he was very close and trusted advisor to the king as well. You can see that his spirit is stirred up because it gets a report from his brother that things are not going well back in Jerusalem. The walls are in rubble, the people are discouraged and under attack, and things are not happening that should be happening back in the land. So Nehemiah gets on his knees and he prays to God and he cries out to God, confesses not only his own sins, but the sins of the nation. He pleads, "Let me go. Send me. Here I am." So he prays that the king will grant him favor, and the next time he comes in to serve King Artaxerxes, and that might have been an intimate dining setting with him and his wife. We don't really know who was all there. But the king noticed that his countenance was down, that he was looking sad. And this was taking a chance, too, to look sad in the presence of the king would be unusual. So he asked Nehemiah, "What's troubling you? What's bothering you?" And he explained to him that he would probably be upset too if the city of his ancestors was in ruins and things weren't going well back in Jerusalem. Well, King Artaxerxes grants him his desire, allows him to go back to build the walls. And not only does he supply him with the permission to go, but he gives him resources and authority, naming him as the governor now of the area, and also a military attaché to take with him of cavalry officers. So he is not just going without authority, he is going with the full authority of the king of Persia. So as we finish this chapter, we see that Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem. And when he arrives in Jerusalem, we'll study what happens next time. But you will see that he stops and prays and develops a strategy for what he's going to do. So the question is for you, are you being nudged to rebuild your wall? Do you have a constant nagging problem that just doesn't seem to go away, no matter how hard you pray about it or how hard you try? Maybe we need to take a look at how to rebuild our walls, and we need to take a look at what holes might be in the wall that are allowing things in that we really don't want to be there. Let's build our walls. Let's start building them in session 2.